So, good evening, Mr. Vice President. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. Ladies and gentlemen and dear students, I'm supposed to give a little introduction about Mr. Timmermans and about what he's going to say tonight, provided that my glasses keep stable. So, Mr. Timmermans, he has been a diplomat and he turned politician already some time ago. But in the beginning of his political career, he was always wearing three-piece suits. And some years ago, he switched to jeans. I'm still wearing suits, but only two-piece, no three-piece. Now, we were also together, you will remember, Mr. Timmermans, but we were together in the convention that ultimately was leading to the Lisbon Treaty. First to Rome II, but that failed. And then you had the referendum in the Netherlands, where you were really fighting to get it through. And nevertheless, it didn't work. Now, ultimately, it resulted in the Lisbon Treaty, which is, I think, a fairly good treaty. I mean, and you experience it also now, that although the situation is rapidly changing, that it's still fit for purpose. And personally, but that's my personal opinion, we shouldn't start a revision of that treaty too early either. Now, the topic that we are going to discuss tonight is the external dimension of the European Green Deal. And you are in the European Commission, you are Mr. Green Deal. I mean, that's your first responsibility, apart, of course, as a Vice President, your overall responsibilities for the policy of the Commission. So in fact, it's about how do you globalize the European Green Deal? That's how do you do this? I mean, the European Green Deal, we have a clear idea what it should be, but how do you globalize it? Now, just a few remarks. A positive one. Decarbonization has become an industrial project in all industries. And I think it's necessary to make the Green Deal happen, that it becomes an industrial project. And I really sense it very well in a number of companies where I'm on the board. They only invest in decarbonization. They do not invest in traditional projects anymore. That's out of the question. Doesn't even come to the board. Now, what about the level playing field, which is something that we so much like to talk about in the European Globus and in the European Commission? It is inexistent. The global playing field, as far as decarbonization is concerned, it's inexistent. And to a certain extent, I personally believe it is an illusion that this will happen under the aegis of a level playing field. Look at IRA, the US legislation. It's a purely protectionist law where you hand out money for new technologies, but only if the local content is very high. Let's say is American and nothing more than that. We, on the other hand, that's a mark I would like to make, is we are presently loosening our competition policy as an answer to what is happening in the United States. And it's true that you see a lot of investments going in that direction. That cannot be denied in a number of sectors. But we, on the other hand, we are losing competition policy. Is this a good thing in the end? We should also ask ourselves whether we can push through our views. Our views, for example, on internalizing externalities. I think at transport, at maritime transport, also transport by air. Can we really globalize ETS? That's not easy at all. And what about the border adjustment measures, the so-called BAMs? Now, you know that I have a past as a trade commissioner. What's the role of trade in all this? Are we going to blindly follow the US in decoupling? Decoupling, first of all, with China. I don't think this would help our goals. We have a somewhat different position vis-à-vis China, I believe. Look at the export figures. Europe is exporting about 65% of what we are producing, United States 25%. So they are much less dependent on export figures than we are. So we are bound to trade, but we will have to trade in a somewhat different way, of course, and I imagine that you will also have some views on that. Didn't we have in the past a lack of economic and industrial foresight? Good question, I think. I recall the example of the solar panels. I tried to have a procedure against China on that, and you took so much time in the European Commission that we finally got a solution, but there were no European companies anymore to produce solar panels. I mean, now I said, okay, we cannot do it without China because they are the only ones that are producing solar panels, which, by the way, is not true. Also, for example, South Korea is doing that. And it's also something that in the end we could do as well. I mean, that wouldn't take that much time to put it in place again. We should also ask ourselves what's strategic. This is a reflection that we have to make what's strategic. And it's a very sensitive matter because you have the looming danger of industrial policy à la française. On the other hand, it is true that a number of sectors are strategic, and you have the competition between small and big member states, rich member states, and less well-done member states. For example, the position of Germany comes to mind. I mean, are we going to put that much money in all our economies to, well, put in place industrial policy that is not guaranteed to be a success? Huh? It could become a battle of subsidies. We're a little bit in it, huh? And so much more. But without further talking on this, I would like to give the floor to one of our students, Sarah Jacobs. We have hired her for grilling you, putting questions. Whether she will succeed, it's not clear. But she will certainly have some tough questions for you. Thank you very much.
So thank you for joining first. And I'll directly start with the first question, which would be, how can the EU implement the EU Green Deal to maintain, on the one hand, an innovative and competitive economy, while also staying a relevant global player, able to lead the change and set high international social, labor, and also environmental standards in a global order?
Thank you very much. And my answer will be about 10 to 15 minutes. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming. When we campaigned for the European elections in 2019, we decided on the Social Democratic side to campaign very strongly for climate and environment, for sustainability, and for a European Green Deal. The only reason we, in the end, got it is because of Fridays for Future and other young people taking the responsibility to go into the streets and convince their parents and others that acting was very urgent. So first thing I need to do is to thank the younger generations, and some of you have graduated to slightly older by now and are here for this activism, because able to gather the momentum and the majorities to get the European Green Deal together without this activism. So first of all, I start with a plea for activism. It's always good to show where you stand and what you feel. And I hope many of you will also do that now that some are questioning the nature part of the European Green Deal and asking for a pause or etc. We don't have the time. We simply don't have the time. This is not the subject of my talk today, but if there are any questions, I would encourage you to ask them later, and I'll gladly answer them. Now, this European Green Deal is a transformational agenda. What we're trying to do is to rid ourselves of the dependency of hydrocarbons, to create a circular economy, and to do it in a way which is long-term consistent with, well, that's the Brussels effect, with regulation that can then be also adopted by others, and regulation creating long-term stability for businesses and investors, etc. So that's what the core element of the Green Deal is. At the heart of this, obviously, is energy transition. And nobody knew that this would become even more urgent after Russia's barbaric invasion of Ukraine in February last year, because that's finally the point where everybody saw we can no longer depend on Russian fossil fuels. And since we don't have, or have very little of our own fossil fuels, why not try and speed up the transition to renewables? They are, by the way, now the cheapest. Results we achieved in the EU are quite remarkable. We were able to reduce energy consumption on an average with 18% in 1 year, which is huge, without major disruptions in society. Obviously, high energy prices had something to do with that, but still, we were able to do that. We were able to wean ourselves of the dependency of Russian oil and gas. On gas, we went from 40% dependency on Russian gas to now below 10%. So there's still a bit to go, but we did quite a tremendous job on that. And we increased in 1 year time solar energy with 40% in 1 year, 40%, which is also huge. And the latest developments in wind turbines, certainly offshore wind, are remarkable. You know, we make them now, they can be made. If you count them from the bottom of the sea to the top, they're as tall as the Eiffel Tower, and they can generate one single wind turbine, 15 megawatts of electricity per hour, which is really revolutionary. We were happy, we're lucky to have 2 shallow seas and a lot of wind in those seas, Baltic Sea and North Sea, that could help us really generate a lot of electricity in combination with a green hydrogen-based economy of the future, where you can store that electricity together with batteries. So that's, I think, quite a revolutionary change in a very, very short period of time. I've learned in my lifetime, also as a diplomat, that sometimes you're in the middle of a revolution and you don't really feel it as such. You only see it afterwards. I was living in Moscow in the early 90s and went from one change to the next, including a coup d'etat, and you know, we just went by our daily business, and only afterwards you realize how profoundly transformational such a period can be. And I have to say, we are in a profoundly transformational period. Now, moving to the international side, I have to say the climate crisis is not the only crisis we're facing. The threatening ecocide is just as threatening to the survival of humanity as a climate crisis. And by the way, don't believe people who say this is about saving the planet. The planet did extremely well without humans on it for a long, long time, and it can survive perfectly well without us if we spoil the party for ourselves. This is about saving humanity, nothing else. So the climate crisis, and then of course we're in the middle of a fundamental industrial revolution. Don't underestimate the impact of this industrial revolution. It is more impactful, or at least as impactful as the first industrial revolution. It is different in the sense that it's much quicker in terms of its application. It is global. It's the first time that the industrial revolution happens across the globe at the same time. And I would recommend you to, if you're interested in history, read Christopher Clark's most recent book called 1848, where he describes, in fact, the effects of the first industrial revolution on institutions and on society. This was a first pan-European movement in almost all countries. Interestingly enough, not in this country, because this country had adopted in 1831 already a very liberal constitution, so there was not that much to rebel against. But in most other countries, there was rebellion, and that rebellion was a consequence also of fundamentally changing socioeconomic relations as a consequence of the Industrial Revolution. And we should not underestimate that this is happening now as well. And there is no institution that we depend upon that will not have to reinvent itself, recalibrate itself, modernize itself if it wants to remain relevant. including universities. But that's another subject matter altogether. So we're in a climate crisis, a biodiversity crisis. We're in the middle of an industrial revolution. I won't talk about AI today, but it's a very interesting subject we should elaborate on more profoundly. And all this combined happens in a shift of geopolitical relations. Europe is becoming smaller by the day, smaller in terms of demography, smaller in terms of parts of the world economy, smaller in terms of military might, and we need to adapt to that. And the one thing that politically is making it more difficult, in my view, but it's a purely political remark, is the temptation of ethno-nationalism as a reaction to the insecurities caused by these profound changes. It is paralyzed. It could paralyze us at a time when the last thing we can afford is paralysis in this very quickly changing world. What does this mean internationally? What we have done with our Green Deal is to create a holistic approach to this transformation. At the center of this is the European climate law, which compels member states and the institutions of the EU to reach at least 55% reduction of emissions by 2030 as compared to 1990 and reach climate neutrality by 2050. This is the long-term security we can offer to everyone who has a stake in this. Second element, crucial also on the international stage, you put a price on carbon. I don't see how we can wean ourselves of hydrocarbons if we don't put a price on carbon. And for that, we have an instrument that has done wonders for us. It was a bit of a slow start to the emissions trading system, but is now recognized by everyone in the businesses concerned as a good instrument. It is predictable, it is tradable, it gives you huge profits if you're good at decarbonizing, it allows you to trade rights with others. And interestingly enough, the Chinese have now devised their own emissions trading system. They know they need to put a price on carbon if they want to move in that direction. I was in India last week, also there. They are now thinking of an emissions trading system along their own requirements. Indonesia, I saw the minister today, told me we're devising an emissions trading system. The only odd man out, and there we still have a bit of work to do, is the United States at federal level, because you would imagine that a country so much based on market economy would love a market economy based instrument, which is the emissions trading system. But they only have it on a regional basis. I hope we can convince Congress. If we can get the Americans to adopt that, then I think we're moving towards a global system of emissions trading, of pricing carbon and using the cost of carbon as an instrument in the decarbonization of our economies. We have so many interesting technological developments going on that really, really excite me, and now the price of the ETS is about 100, more or less, euros per ton. It always fluctuates because it's a market instrument. It went down a lot during, well, not that much actually, but it went down during the COVID period when of course, the economy was doing worse, obviously. And it's at this price level, a number of technologies are coming close to market. Even technologies such as direct air capture and CCSU, they're coming close to market, and they will certainly help us decarbonize. Now, my prediction is that we will not stay within the 1.5 degree target we've set for ourselves. We're most probably going to overshoot, and Europe is a case in point. This continent is warming up faster than other parts of the world. But with decarbonizing, with reducing emissions, and with the new technologies in the future, I believe we can come back under the 1.5. At the end of the day, there's no reason to despair. There's no reason for complacency either. Technology is not going to solve everything, but there's no reason to despair. Now, the fact is, why am I, when I'm in India last week, why are they so much more proactive? Why do they reach out so much more? Why don't I get the same, well, you've had your development, now it's our turn, don't talk to us about emission reductions, etc. Why don't they do that anymore? Because everyone's faced with climate crises almost on a daily basis. No country is unaffected. And so every country knows that everyone has a stake at this energy transition and reducing our emissions. And that creates a momentum on the global scale that I think we should use. We're in a good position to use this. And I've experienced this several times now at 3 COPs in a row, the conferences of parties that looks into the measures we need to take based on the analysis made by a panel of scientists from all over the world. Things are not going well enough, but the global community is coming step by step close together in understanding that there's no escape for anyone in this if we don't stick together. And then our emissions trading system, our climate law, the things we're actually doing in reducing energy consumption, the things we're doing very quickly to increase the rate of renewable energy, all this put together sort of sets a standard that is global. It's becoming more and more global. It gives us the credibility in these negotiations, more than any other negotiations. Your credibility depends purely on what you're actually doing at home. Setting a target for 2050 is easy, but not charting out with great precision how to get there, it undermines your credibility. And there is a weakness in the American system, and that just throwing a lot of money at it, not thinking enough, in my view, in terms of regulation, that will come back and haunt them, especially because difference with us is we don't have the luxury of having two energy systems parallel to each other. They will have the luxury of having a carbon-based energy system next to a decarbonized energy system because they have their own natural resources. It's a luxury, but also a threat. For us, that luxury doesn't exist, so it just stimulates our energy transition more. And as you know very well, it's getting cheaper by the day in comparison to fossil fuels. And this is the first year, by the way, that more money was invested in renewables than in the traditional energy resourcing. So we're starting to move in the right direction. Now, what does this mean for trade? Before I speak too long, I need to address, obviously, Karel's favorite subject. Trade, the art of trade, the vision of trade had been changing, as you know, over the last 10 years. In society, there is increasing resistance and reluctance to see trade as an asset, and more trade is seen as a threat to values, as a threat to climate, as a threat to the environment. I think we have to be very, very careful not to throw away the baby with the bathwater when we talk about trade. So we need to reinvent the way we look at trade in light of the values that are shared by European citizens. I had a long discussion today with two ministers from Indonesia and Malaysia about palm oil. And I kept telling them the legislation on deforestation adopted in Europe is not because we want to punish you. It's because European citizens, a large majority of European citizens, doesn't want to be responsible for deforestation. So they want to make choices that don't contribute to deforestation. So work with us, if you think it can be possible, and I think it can, to have sustainable palm oil production, to have sustainable cocoa production, coffee production, rubber production. And they've accepted the challenge. So I think that's the future of trade, if we can have trade on that basis. I had a long talk with President Lula of Brazil about the fact that we still are not able to ratify the agreement, Mercosur agreement, because there's still no trust in Latin America doing its part to prevent further deforestation. Lula is prepared to work with us on that. So let's try and get to agreements with him. How do we help him avoid deforestation, counter deforestation? How do we plant more trees? How do we make this energy transition happen and make that part of your trade arrangements, like we did, for instance, with New Zealand? So I think it is essential that we defend trade as an instrument of growth in our economy, but it has to become an instrument of sustainable growth, not destructive growth. And it is not there yet today. So I would, it's also perhaps the country I'm from, I don't know, but I have resistance against simply dismissing trade as an instrument for the bad, for something that's bad. Traditional trade, when, for instance, we have requirements for products, how they are made in Europe. When we have trade agreements, traditional trade agreements, we only have requirements on the end state of the product we import. We did not have, until recently, very strong requirements on the social conditions under which the product was made, on the environmental conditions, on the impact on deforestation, etc. We need to incorporate these things in our trade agreement. In French, they call it clause miroir. I think it is only fair that if we demand something from European producers, we have the same demands on people who want to come on the European market with their products. That's the Brussels effect, as it is traditionally called. And we need to use that Brussels effect now also for the good of the environment, for the good of the climate crisis, to combat the climate crisis and the combat the ecocide. So that's, I think, the future of trade. There is more and more of a constituency to go into that direction, and I welcome that. But the bottom line for me is the European Green Deal. I mean, going into green policies has the risk of becoming protectionist. So it is, for us, essential that we apply these green policies and at the same time avoid the trap of protectionism, but still can have strong requirements on those who want to be active on the market that are in line with the goals we want to achieve ourselves in the Green Deal. And no country does this to do us a favor. Some countries, I am absolutely convinced that countries like China, India, Indonesia, they are devising their own ETS system because of CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, without even being in force, has had a huge preemptive effect on the calculations made in our trading partners. Are we still going to get access to the European market? How can we reduce our carbon footprint? How can we prove that we're not causing a carbon leakage? And then we will not be hit by levies on the CBAM. So it is already transforming the way they do business. And that is also a very positive effect of the European Green Deal. Let me stop here. I've always been told I should stop on a positive note. This is a positive note. There are many more negative notes I could make, but perhaps in reaction to your questions. And I'm now looking forward to being grilled by you, Ms. Jacobs. You only have one microphone, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I think we have to actually share. Okay, so the first question I would ask is how can we ensure that the Green Deal is truly environmentally sustainable and avoids unintended dependencies when considering the strategic aspects of transition?
Yes, I think this is an essential question. And the honesty requires me to say that in this fundamental transformation, we will also make mistakes. And we need to be able to correct course if that is necessary along the way. So what we need to do is to have a continuous feedback loop with the member states, with our other constituents, with businesses that tell us, well, this is what you intend to achieve with your measure, but we're going in a different direction so that we can correct course when it is necessary. So what we need to avoid is to be overly dogmatic with these things and be very flexible and also react to what other major players are doing. IRA was mentioned by Karel, and IRA is a huge challenge because we had, to give you one example, the Inflation Reduction Act, which is just a huge amount of money put on the table. By the way, not more than we're putting on the table if you put all the European funds together, but that's another matter. It has led to businesses, as businesses do, saying to us, well, you give us the same money or we're gone. And so, you know, you can call their bluff. Some you have to call their bluff. Others you have to say, okay, you're going. So how can we match what you're getting? Tell us what you're getting and perhaps we could match it. Now, some businesses are tempted, but at the same time, they like the fact that they have regulatory stability here, which they don't get in the US. So we need to work with that as well. But in one area, you know, we have automotive industry is systemic for the European economy. For many, many years, when electric vehicles were being developed in the United States and especially in Korea and then in China, the automotive industry in Europe said, electric, it's never going to be. We will make the best and the best performing, the cleanest combustion engines that the world has ever seen. It is sort of the pride of engineers because an electric vehicle doesn't make you proud because it's simple in terms of engineering as compared to a combustion engine. So the European automotive industry hesitated, if I'm being kind, I could use other words, for too long and missed out on the first 10 years of the development of EVs in other places. So now we have to catch up. And what is the 1/3 of the cost of an EV is the battery. And so if you can make battery at low cost, you have a huge competitive edge. And that's what's happening now with all these cars coming from China. So we need to develop our own European batteries. They also have to be less dependent on rare earths or very difficult to get commodities. They have to be recyclable, and we're doing that. But investment in European batteries was at 40% of global investment in batteries last year. After IRA, it's gone down to 1%. So now, because of the investments in the US, European producers are waiting a bit. I don't know how long this will take, but we need to make sure that we react to that. We perhaps change some of our policies. We came out with the Industrial Act, which says we learned from the solar panel disaster. This shouldn't happen again. So if we invent something, we also want that invention to stay. And then perhaps in the investments we make, why not say that 40% of what is developed should also be built in Europe? Why not? The Chinese are doing the same. So also here, I think we need to rethink our industrial policy and our trade policy. But more than anything else, against the background of the Green Deal, we also need to be nimble and adaptive and apply all the ingenuity we have, because they will throw us many, many curveballs in the years to come, and we need to be able to react to them.
Thank you. The next question is looking a little bit in the future, looking to the next year. And the question is, how do you see a Green Deal 2.0 for the EU policy program 2024 to 2029 after the upcoming elections next year?
What I see in general in Europe, and not only in Europe, but especially in Europe, is this almost existential insecurity with many people at many levels. And this is the first time since the Second World War that especially the middle classes in Europe have come to the conclusion that they will probably live in an age of decline rather than an age of improvement of their situation. That has a huge, profound psychological effect on where people are. If you believe decline is inevitable, you hang on to what you have with all your might, all your might. But if you hang on to what you have with all your might, you don't take steps into the future. You only look at tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, and next year will be worse. 10 years' time will it be even worse. And that is, I think, the main problem of today. And it is very easy to politically exploit this feeling and to sell people as a perspective the image of a past. Nostalgia has become, I don't want to sound Marxist, but nostalgia has become the opium of the people. So based on ethno-nationalism. So we say to people, we were happy when we were on our own, and we were happy in the past, and I will take you to that past. Well, that past never was, so it can never be. But it does chain people to the present, and it doesn't allow people to think of a prosperous future. And I think we are under an obligation, and I say this especially in the university, to stand up for science, for facts, for analysis that is inevitable, and to bring that into the debate. We're also responsible to not avoid debates, to not exclude people from debates, which is also a trend I see in some universities. Even if somebody has an opinion I find profoundly disgusting, I still shouldn't cancel that person. They should be part of the debate. You can cancel their views, but not the person. If you don't have a debate with them, they feel canceled as person. And I think that is a mistake. It will not help us solve the problems we're faced with. So what we need, if we want to succeed, is a shimmer of trust in the future. And who has that more than young people? If they, I got an honorary doctorate in Delft last year, and I was talking to professors of my age. I'm 62 now, and they were saying my students have changed over the last 30 years so dramatically. 30 years ago, 20 years ago, what they wanted is to have a good degree, to have opportunity for a job at Shell, to get a car, to buy a house. I don't have those students anymore. They now want to go into innovations. They want to have a startup. They want to find solutions. They want to contribute to society. And they're willing to be modest in their personal requirements to do that. Now, the problem of my generation, I can't say this enough. We were educated by our parents with this very fundamental view, take good care of yourselves. So we did. And then we educated our children with a view, take good care of us. And they do. But now it is important and imperative that we become good ancestors. that we become good ancestors. This is the most crucial message I have for you today. We have to think of ourselves. How will our grandchildren and generations after that look on us? Have we been good ancestors to them? We're not being good ancestors right now, but it doesn't take that much of an effort to be a good ancestor. And I hope you can help us define what that is. And in this transformation, what is the most important thing is that we maintain the momentum, the speed. The longer we take, the more we hesitate, the more we ask for a pause, the more expensive it becomes, the more difficult it becomes. The climate crisis will not wait because a prime minister asks for a pause. It doesn't happen like that. So we need to continue to push for the changes that will be difficult and painful, costly, but only a fraction of the cost if we don't embrace the change. And this is a concept we really, really need to get into our collective minds and hearts.
Thank you. So you just mentioned expensive, costly. I have one more question that deals a little bit with the practical side from the consumer point of view. And more people they think that like taking climate action is going to cost them their welfare, and many already have difficulties paying their bills. So how are you going to make sure that the European climate policies are not only strong, but also social and fair for the low and middle income classes?
First of all, and let me start on that. Everybody needs to understand that if we do nothing, the cost will be much, much, much higher. And the ones affected by that are the ones already in a precarious position. They are in any revolutionary age or change age, they're always the ones who suffer most. That's always been the case, unless you correct that. And I would maintain that in a society where companies, especially multinationals, are making unprecedented profits. Oil companies have been making billions and billions of profits. So what is the problem with our system of redistribution? Why is it not working? Isn't that the question we should be asking? And I think it is almost criminally negligent to use the precarious situations of citizens as an argument not to embrace the need for change to react to the climate crisis. The problem is not that they can't afford it. The problem is that our society is not well organized to organize this in a solidarity-based way. Politics at the end of the day is only about one thing: redistribution. And then say, oh, that's that lefty, the pinko guy again with his redistribution. But redistribution is not left-wing or right-wing. If you give tax relief to big companies, that's also redistribution. So redistribution is the art of tuning our fiscal and other systems so that you leave no one behind. That is my deep conviction. And this becomes more complicated in an age of profound transformation. But it is not impossible. It is not impossible. So we also created, as part of the revenues from the emissions trading system, we will create a social climate fund. That social climate fund can help people refurbish their homes if they can't afford to do it themselves. That social climate fund can support corporations who have a lot of low rent housing, which, by the way, is mostly the least energy efficient housing. They can subsidize them to make that a very energy efficient housing, to install solar panels, heat pumps, etc. People also in Flanders and in my country who can afford it are already doing this, and bless them. It's good that they're doing this because they're bringing their bills down. But we also have to make sure we help people who can't afford to do this. And for that, the revenues will have to be found, for instance, in parts of the emissions trading system. So it's a political choice. It's a political choice. It's not, I mean, there will always be people who are better off and people who are worse off. But to let people in a precarious situation is a choice. It's a political choice. Of course, if you make a different political choice, some people will start to complain because that you're taking away their fourth holiday, their third car, their second swimming pool in their homes. I don't care. If you want a society to be based on a bit more solidarity, these are the choices we will have to make. And I feel confident that apart from ideology or political direction, if I look at the young generations in Europe, they're willing to make that sacrifice. They're already making it, actually. And that should give us confidence that we can do it.
Thank you. So that was it from my side. So now I'm giving the floor the chance to also ask some grilling questions. Yes.
Only two? Well, on both questions, a resounding yes, I will do my best. But I can't hide the fact that we are now in a more adverse political atmosphere. And that for some, the link between the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis is not evident. People understand the climate crisis by now. They see it, they see the storms, they see the droughts, etc. If I say to people between 60 and 70% of our soils are in a bad condition, if I say our pollinators are disappearing at incredible rate, it's much less easy to communicate that. And then it becomes easier to say, yes, but our food price is already so high. What you're doing is going to create even higher food prices. Well, the opposite is true, obviously, as you know. If we continue like this with our practices and increase the use of chemical pesticides, increase the use of fertilizers, our soils will be completely dead. Nothing grows on dead soil. And that soil also doesn't absorb CO2. So the matter is extremely urgent. And the only thing we're asking with the nature restoration law is to commit to do what all these member states agreed to do in Montreal in COP15. So we're not going beyond that, which is, if you are in a certain situation, would you please promise not to let it get worse? We're not even asking them to make it much better, but not to let it get worse. And they're saying, oh, no, we need a pause. It's too much, etc. And it's an ideology. Well, and here I will need academia's help. Scientific facts are not an ideology, for heaven's sake. I think the ideology is closing your eyes for scientific facts. That's where the ideology is. So on both counts, I think we really need to act. We will continue to try and get a majority for the nature restoration law, which is in fact the climate law for biodiversity as a basis. We'll also see how far we can go with soil restoration. We will also need to push change in the agricultural sector. And what I just don't get is why we're not better at forging alliances with the farmers, and we let the agro-industrial complex stand between us and the farmers get the feeling that the only one standing up for them is the agro-industrial complex. But we need to create synergies with our farmers, and especially the young farmers who want to change because they're not stupid, they're smart. They know they can't continue like they're doing right now. But it's extremely complicated today. My biggest worry today is that these issues, including climate policy, will be dragged into the cultural wars that we see happening. And then this will lead to paralysis. Whereas I would hope so much that we would have the common sense of saying, fighting the threatening ecocide and fighting the climate crisis is neither left nor right. It is a task that transcends any other form of political differences. And I would wish that we could come to that conclusion, and that we could convince all political parties not to play games with this issue. You're playing games with humanity's survival percentages.
Thank you. Yes.
And I frankly don't believe in the concept of degrowth as a prospect. I do believe in a fundamentally different form of growth. We could perform extremely well if we would introduce more quickly a circular economy. You know, what the growth based on using natural resources, extracting them, using them, and then burning them or throwing them away, that doesn't have a future with 10 billion people on this planet. The planet cannot support that. But an economic model that's based on a circular economy, so that you make stuff that can be repaired, like our grandparents were used to, by the way, and that you make stuff, if it can't be repaired, it can be recycled. If you use human invention to create other forms of services and industrial products that do not depend on rare earths, then I think humanity has a future. And by the way, when we talk about degrowth, isn't that a bit of a decadent concept in the Western world? Would you take the concept of degrowth to Africa, with 600 million people still don't have access to electricity, or to India, or to other places on the planet? I think it's a bit lazy to think in those terms. These people want what we have. And are we going to say to them, no, you can't have it. We had it all, and now it's too dangerous for the planet. That's not a concept. But if they want what we have, making the same mistakes we have made, they'll kill all of us. So it's in our interest to help them leapfrog a number of industrial developments we've had in the past, and leapfrog immediately into renewables, for instance, and leapfrog immediately as much as they can into circular economy. By the way, it's not that difficult to explain the concept of circular economy to poor people because they have lived in forms of circular economy their whole lives. So I think I would more think in terms of changing the concept of growth, because if you say degrowth, you confirm people's fears that our future will be bleaker than our present, which I don't think it needs to be. But it depends on what you expect of the future. And I think if we don't change our ways, and sorry to be so blunt, but I am deeply convinced, and I've become more convinced almost by the day, if we don't change our ways, our kids will be fighting wars over water and food. And it doesn't have to be like that if we change our ways. There is room for 10 billion people on this planet if we have a circular economy, if we introduce new breeding techniques, if we move away from agricultural practices only geared towards increasing production at any cost, etc., etc. If we change our diets, if we make a conscious choice, all these things can heavily contribute to a planet that can sustain 10 billion people. Well, first of all, nobody believed we could pull it off, the reform of and expansion of the ETS system. Nobody believed we could pull it off, the end to the combustion engine by 2035. Nobody believed we could pull it off, the energy efficiency measures we've taken, etc., etc. Nobody believed we could pull off Fit for 55, and we did anyway. Many people in my college didn't believe it, but you have to stand for what you believe in. You have to come with all the arguments. The fact that we did extensive consultation and then also did extensive benchmarking of our proposals by external experts and others helped us have proposals that, you could disagree with the political goals, but you could hardly disagree with the factual content, the basis for our analysis. So this whole experience with Fit for 55 has made me more optimistic about what we can achieve. At the same time, I think the fact that it takes time is a necessary price we pay for democracy. And I would pay it any day of the year. Because the alternative, which in some quarters is becoming more and more attractive, of autocracy would not be my choice. because autocracy automatically leads to people not being heard, to minorities being treated badly, to other people being marginalized. That's in the nature of autocracy. So that's not a path we should follow. So yes, democracy takes a bit more time, but then also the quality of the results is a lot better. And respecting, you know, we are such diverse societies. Everything we do, if we want to be based on democracy, the rule of law, and the respect for human rights, has to be with a preponderance to protecting the position of minorities. And you don't do that in an autocracy. So I would take the extra time, but still go as fast as I can. And at the European Commission, we have to be very, very vigilant that we deliver the quality that people expect from us. That's the only asset we have, the quality of our work.
Yes.
I think that there are lots of ideas.
One of the governments that has been quite consistent in its support for what we do is the French government, regardless of all the political difficulties there are in France. And that's a direct consequence for the way they had organized public consultation and dialogue about the need for climate policy. They could always refer to those consultations. And I think that could be a good example for what we could do in different member states and also at the EU level. As I said before, in any industrial revolution, all institutions will have to recalibrate themselves, sometimes reinvent themselves. And if you are used to switching on the TV and looking at people, you know, doing the best, singing a good song, and you're allowed to vote for that live at the moment, and at the same time, other choices in your life, you only get a vote once every 5 years, and then it's sort of a pan-subject vote. You need to trust the person. Or in a society like ours, which is to a high degree post ideological, you have to engage more directly with people in terms of their participation in democracy. I don't have all the answers, but I think that the things you mentioned could really help us re-engage with citizens that very often feel left outside of the debate. Having said all that, any transformational project which is based on rules and regulations and on political choices will always have elements of top-down. As long as you can engage with people in the preparation of these and they feel heard and they see that what they say is reflected in your proposal, then it can work. But if you work in total isolation, then it will not work. At the same time, in a democracy, this warrants a broad consensus on respect for the democratic rules. And there I worry most. It's very easy to portray climate policy as something for the, you know, tofu eating Tesla driver, et cetera, et cetera. Very easy to do that. Or very easy to say it's an ideology. They've all gone crazy. Look at Timmermans, the climate pope. It's not by chance that they use, you know, religious references, because also we've become a society where very often religion is seen as irrational or something not to trust. And the paradox here is, and I want to repeat that, we are trying to prove that what we do is based on science and on analysis. And here I would need your help very much in finding also the words, the images. Sometimes you are surprised. Sir David Attenborough, he found images that really, really changed. My plastic legislation got through in 8 months' time. Without Attenborough, I don't think we would have gotten there with his images of what plastic is doing in the oceans. So we need to look for those ways of creating momentum in the communication. And I think it is very important that my generation and anybody above the age of, let's say 40, should embrace the concept of being good ancestors. I mean, it does. As a politician, I tell you, we cannot rationalize everything. Our reaction is very often too rational to arguments that are purely emotional. You have to bring in an emotional argument as well. And you have to bring in an argument of self-interest, enlightened self-interest. And only a combination of these three arguments, the rational one, the emotional one, and the self-interest one, will win the argument. And the balance between the three is the noble art of good politics. And it's very, very difficult in a time of such profound changes as we are experiencing right now.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. I'm going to stick to that side. You.
Well, frankly, I believe there's almost no one trying to promote multilateralism more than the European Union right now. We have others who are less inclined to do that. But your question is very pertinent because I don't need to convince anyone anywhere on this planet of the urgency of the climate crisis. That has changed since I've gotten this mandate 4 years ago. 4 years ago, they would still be saying, yeah, that's a luxury problem. It's not our problem. We need to increase our production. And even if we use coal for that, I mean, India was a case in point. They're no longer saying that. So everybody feels the pressure of the climate crisis. But some feel that pressure more than others if they can't afford to adapt to the climate crisis. So the only way we can create levels of cooperation and multilateralism if we are able to demonstrate that those poorest countries on this planet, especially the small island developing states, but also many African states, actually do get international support in adapting to the already existing climate crisis. That's the only way that will convince them that we are not just preaching just transition within our borders, but also preaching just transition at an international level. And here I have to say the European Union has done more than its fair share in putting money on the table. We still need to convince Americans and others to do the same thing. But also we have to come with more concrete measures, and sometimes it will also have to be trade measures that will allow the poorest countries free access to the European market. And I think we need to, I think the next decade will be extremely difficult from a financial perspective because interest rates are up, so borrowing is a lot more expensive than before. We have to spend a lot of money on defending ourselves against Russian aggression and reconstructing Ukraine at some point. The transition in the climate crisis also is very, very costly affair. So to then go within the present rules to the international community, say, okay, let's borrow ourselves out of this crisis is not going to work. So we also have to look at the existing international financial architecture and change that. Now, Macron's organizing a conference in Paris on the 23rd of June to look at this more specifically. So what we need to do, first of all, we need to put the international financial means for developing countries. So many of the richer countries have so-called special drawing rights, which they're not using because they want to keep them for themselves. Put them at the disposal of African countries or small island developing states. With only a fraction of those special drawing rights, they could make massive investments in increasing their resilience against the climate change. Then we have to put the multilateral development banks in a position to leverage more money. We've made a program in Europe years ago called InvestEU, where we allowed the European Investment Bank and other banks to leverage investment also for small and medium-sized enterprises. And that worked extremely well. The leverage effect, we were always criticized. Oh, you count the leverage effect of 1 on 10. That's never going to happen. No, it went 1 on 15 sometimes. So we need to put the African Development Bank and other development banks in a position to have the capital to help invest. And we as Western countries will then also have to convince our investors to invest there and then tell them we have your back. So if the investment goes sour, we will take care of part of the risk you are running. These are the new models of development that we need to look into, and that will create a true multilateral, a new multilateral dynamics that will hopefully increase our trustworthiness as an international partner. But as you will know, the fact that the tensions between the United States and China are increasing is not helping us. And I would like to join Karel when he said earlier, you know, we have our own position with China. I don't believe in fully slamming the door on China. I think that's not not a wise policy. I feel we need to engage, but we can't afford to be naive. We need to protect ourselves, but we also need to engage with them. So why not try and find ways forward in which we say, you have requirements for us to operate on your markets. We will ask the same requirements of you when you want to operate on our market. We're not doing that yet with the Chinese. So I would sort of want to go in that direction. Full confrontation and disengagement with China is something humanity cannot afford to do. I'm deeply convinced of that.
Thank you. So that was it from my side. I'll give the word to the Dean Luc Soete for some closing remarks. Thank you. I think you can, whatever you prefer.
Yes. Well, I think we've had a fascinating tour de force in terms of giving an overview of all the issues which are there. And I tried each time to think of something you hadn't talked about, just like the last issue about finance, but then you covered it. And so it is really amazing to see how this topic of the European Green Deal covers really where we started from industrial policies. And as you highlighted, the dangers of protectionism to some extent in these kind of industrial policies. And I think the concerns there are well taken. I think there, we as scientists, or at least social scientists, we can respond to you asking us for more insights, more evidence, etc. And I think that even though we deal with totally different issues, the failures in industrial policies of the past, and you know there were many in Europe, are certainly tools whereby we can help to assist in terms of the industrial policies which are needed now, for instance, within these areas of strategic autonomy, technological sovereignty, etc. They're also with respect to the energy transition. I mean, I think you highlighted the importance of what we are witnessing today in terms of the real industrial transformation which is occurring with the decarbonization, which Karel mentioned already, which every large company is dealing with. And we happen to have an industry in Europe which is very energy intensive. Remember, the origins to some extent of the whole European Union date back to the imports coal and steel. So what happens today with respect to renewables? Is it like Ricardo Hausmann is claiming that this is the end of the flat energy priced world and that we get differences between where renewables are cheap, like Rotterdam, Delfzijl, Zeebrugge, Antwerp, and no longer maybe Camelot, Heerlen, the Ruhr area? Is it that maybe the sun sectors in sun Spain with 4,000 hours of sun as compared to our 900 hours on average here allow for, say, compressed solar power, allowing you to work on it 24 hours a day? So is it that maybe this energy intensive industry will relocate within Europe? And how do we respond to this? Maybe this is the opportunity for all the peripheral regions, maybe in Europe, which were full of sun and tourists, but not of industry.
You will see, in my view, what you to respond to that immediately. Our assumption is always you take the energy to the industry. So you transport the coal or the oil to a port, and that's where the industry is. With renewables and also with hydrogen at the present state of technology, industry will probably go there where the energy is cheapest, which is a completely different mindset, and we need to prepare for that.
And that's where I would say we need to learn from the past in terms of improving our industrial policies in this particular area. You mentioned the circular economy. I happen to be for the Commission alongside maybe what Sebastian was also arguing, the cities, the local communities. This is really where they have the energy to respond to the say, the green energy or the Green Deal, in the sense that you will find there people wanting, having the motivation, so to say, to address it. So how do we bring cities back into the scheme? We have the missions of the 100 cities. To what extent do we really have to move closer between the European Commission and the city governance level with procurement, etc., allowing much more faster movement in the direction, for instance, of the Green Deal? Is something also I like very much, this idea whereby the circular economy linked to procurement policies could really make a big, major difference. And the last point, which I think is also fascinating, what you mentioned, is, of course, this global dimensions, which is really also the points made by Karel about trade, but also the enormous financial imbalances. I was discussing with Andrés Velasco, the dean at LSE, previously Minister of Finance of Chile, and he was explaining to me that this energy transition, what it would require in investment in the South, in the developing countries. It's something like $5 trillion. And they don't have that money, because any money there to put more in investment will mean less consumption. Yet, as you said, these countries want to grow and want, of course, more consumption. So how do we deal with this? So I liked very much your last points, and I hope that this discussion, which Macron will lead.
The return on investment for renewables is so much quicker than in other energy forms. If we can mobilize, if we can sort of deleverage the risk factor, then we will get private investors also to invest, for instance, in solar power in Africa. It makes so much sense, but the risk is too big because of corruption, because of uncertainty, because of weak supply chains. So we need to address that premium in part with public money. There's no alternative. And then the investment, we would not have a solar power industry which is so performing today if we did not invest a huge amount of public money to build it up. And now and same goes for wind. Now it pays for itself.
So to conclude, I think that if I represent here not just the old professors, but also the young students, etc., I think you can count on us in the sense of the scientific community to help. Certainly the proximity here with the Commission is something which I discovered is very different from Maastricht. And I noticed, I know it is not that far away, but you can see that you can get so much more dynamics. Like, for instance, having you talk to the students here, which would be much more complex to get you outside of Brussels. So in this sense, this place is really the place to give government advice. So I think here at the Brussels School of Governance, we're there to give that advice, evidence-based, critical now and then, but in general also trying to find the same aims as the ones you have in terms of making this humanity survive the current crisis.
With a quote in Dutch, so I hope you understand that, because you mentioned Maastricht. A comedian and poet called Toon Hermans once said, nergens is het licht zo licht als op het Vrijthof in Maastricht. En overdrijf ik daarbij lichtelijk, is ook dat Maastrichtelijk.